welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Lucy Frazer, Solicitor General for England and Wales, previously Prisons Minister. Labour's Shadow Schools Minister and former charity boss, Peter Kyle. Anthony Costello, Professor of Global Health at University College London, former World Health Organisation's Director for Maternal, Child and Adolescent Health, and a member of Independent SAGE, a group of scientists providing independent advice on COVID. Joining us down the line, Heather McGregor, businesswoman, Executive Dean of the Edinburgh Business School, and for many years, the FT's personal finance columnist, Miss Moneypenny, and journalist and broadcaster, Queen of the radio airways for 33 years as presenter of Radio 4's Woman's Hour, Jenni Murray. Good evening. Welcome to my guests here in the studio. Welcome to Heather, who joins us down the line. And, of course, welcome to our QT50. Very good to see you all again. And for those of you watching at home, in case you're not aware, our QT50 is a pool of 50 people, and we take 20 from that pool every week. So some of these faces you might see from week to week, and that is our QT50. And, of course, welcome to you at home, and you can join in the conversation in the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. Right. Let's take our first question, which is from Tim Down.
Good evening, Fiona, panel. The government is committed to £1.4 billion for the schools catch-up. Are the government waiting for Marcus Rashford to step in before they sort the rest of the school funding out?
Peter.
Well, what I couldn't believe about this is that Kevin Collins was hired by the Prime Minister, and when he hired him, he would have known precisely the direction of travel from the person that he was hiring. And then when he came back with a report, which was very, very obvious what it was going to report for quite a long time leading up to it. It's very in line with what all the other countries who are similar to Britain and our economies are calling for. Suddenly, Boris Johnson throws his hands up and says no, Rishi Sunak cuts all the money, and Gavin Williams refuses to go to war for them. Now, for students, what I couldn't understand from all of this was that just last week I met a parent of a kid who, with his friends, jumped over the fence of his school so that they could get into school and actually do some activity over the weekends and use the facilities that they have. Now, what does that say about Britain right now? We've got students who are breaking into school because they want to be in school so much, and the barrier is the government stopping them. We don't have a government which is matching the ambition that young people have for themselves right now. And we have a government that has a catchphrase about levelling up. But if levelling up is not about students and education, if levelling up is not about investing in our people, then what is levelling up for?
Jenni.
I have to say I was somewhat baffled when a real expert in education, Sir Kevin Collins, was asked to be the Tsar to show how we could get this really serious situation up and running again. He came up with what I presume was a terrific plan, because he really knew what he was talking about. Needed £15 billion, a lot of money, admittedly, but it was a long-term plan. For kids who really, really, really need help, you know, there are going to be young people leaving school very shortly who have had hardly any education for their final years, which is really worrying. So then Gavin Williams says yesterday, yes, he sort of accepted that the 15 billion would have to go down to 1.4 billion. And he said, bizarrely, I found it particularly bizarre because I'm a Yorkshire woman, he said he was a Yorkshire man and he thought 1.4 billion was a lot of money. Yes, Gavin, lot of money, but not enough.
So, Lucy, Boris Johnson said education was his biggest priority. Do you think it's looking like that right now?
I do. I think that, first of all, I'm pleased that Tim's brought up the question, because I think that children have had a really, really tough time, and it is absolutely right that the government stands behind them and supports them.
But it's not standing behind its own education recovery czar, is it?
Well, Tim's referred to the 1.4 billion. That's going to be a really important catch-up money, and what that money is going towards is one-to-one tuition, so 100 million hours of one-to-one tuition, which the evidence says will really ensure that they catch up. It's going to support teachers and giving teachers additional training. It's going to early years. Those are all things that Kevin Collins set out and said that we ought to do.
Now, but he's also said that you are failing a generation of school children.
Well, if I explain the additional money that Kevin Collins asked for, so the additional money that people have been talking about over the last 24 hours, that all relates to additional hours for teaching for the school day. And the issue about that is it might be a brilliant idea. It could be a brilliant idea, and if delivered in the right way, may well improve life chances. But the evidence isn't as clear at the moment as the evidence of the one-to-one tuition.
But Lucy,
it's also,
the US,
if I could just
the US is spending 30 times more than Britain. 30 times. £1,500 per child. You're spending 50. How on earth do you expect students to catch up with £50 over 2 years? I mean, it's just not going to happen, is it?
So I'll come back to Peter's point in a minute. But if I just finish, that the extra money...
Briefly.
Very, very briefly, but it's a really important point. The extra money is for the additional hours if we go beyond the school day. So we need to see the evidence as to whether that will improve life chances, and it may well do. And we also, it's quite a controversial measure. We need to ensure the unions are behind it. We need to ensure parents are behind it. We need to ensure students are behind it. Now, if they are, and if we do get that evidence, the Department of Education is reviewing that, is reviewing it at the moment in time for the spending review. And Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has clearly said that is not the end of the money. And so we may very well be open to spending that additional money, levelling up, as Jenni said, which is absolutely important, and giving the children the support they need. Just coming to Peter's point. So the money that he says other countries are spending on education, we're not really comparing apples and pears. So the statistics that have been bandied about over the last 24 hours, our statistics, our 1.4 billion doesn't include
hang on a minute. I must let our audience in, but the statistics are coming from Kevin Collins. So Kevin Collins is talking about something like £310 per pupil over 3 years. In the Netherlands, it's £2,500. In the USA, it's £1,600. I presume he knows what he's talking about.
He asked for £700 per student.
Kevin Collins has done a fantastic job, and I think he was a great person to have chosen to do this role. But the money, when he makes those calculations, doesn't include, for example, the Oak Academy, the National Academy that the government set up. It doesn't include all the funding that we've put in to the laptops. The 1.4.
I'm going to let the audience in. I'm sorry. I appreciate you getting asked. Let me just get. I appreciate we asked a lot of questions from us on the panel, but I must let the audiences as well. So forgive me, Lucy. Colette.
Thank you, Fiona. Hello, panel. I'm quite shocked at what I'm hearing. Do we not think this generation's been failed enough? As an employer, we're talking about students coming out, you just said about coming out and going into the employment market. We can't fail this generation anymore that's already been failed. They're going to be left with a tax bill of this, and we owe it to them to actually put the right amount of money. And I think it's very easy to sit there, Lucy, privately educated, when you don't know where £50 goes. This will not fill that education gap for any school children or anybody into further education or anything else.
Fatima?
So the extra funding is for tutoring the children who need it the most. But what about in those schools and in those areas where the children who need it the most are the majority of the children? How are the teachers supposed to choose which of their students they support and which they leave to fend for themselves? There isn't enough money to support everybody.
Donna?
Our children are precious, and £50 per child is just absolutely ludicrous. It's wah-wah land. If you're going to spend the money, at least listen to the man's advice. The man's advice, you're not taking it on board. £50, honestly, it is a joke. Did Boris Johnson spend £50 on his apartment?
Let me go to Heather.
Well,
Heather.
I actually think that what was asked for was a lot more than just extra hours of teaching. One of the things that Kevin Collins asked for was 100 extra hours of teaching a year for sixth formers and more funding for disadvantaged sixth formers. We in universities, and I sit here running a business school in a university, are dealing with people coming inadequately prepared to university, and in some cases are not going to university at all. And that is not just storing up problem for those people. As we heard the audience, this is failing children. But I'll tell you who else it is failing. In 5 years' time, it will be failing business, because people will not be upskilled for the jobs that will be needed in the post-COVID economy. And Tim, I loved you calling out Marcus Rashford. You know, what we need is more people that make a difference.
And Heather, what do you think of those who say it would be lovely to spend 15 billion on education, but there are going to be so many demands on the public purse that this is one among many? And ultimately, it's all going to have to be paid back one day.
The public purse is being used for at the moment. It's being used at the moment for furlough. There are still, for instance, 35,000 aircrew on furlough. So what is happening is the government is temporarily propping up things in the very short term. I'm more worried about what is happening over the much longer term. The decisions that are made now will affect in 5, 10, 15 years' time. And you know what? That's way outside the life of this parliament. And, you know, this is why I've never joined a political party.
Well, the Collins Review does say that the scarring effect, if we don't invest this money, would be 100 billion out of our economy going forward. That's the kind of scale of the challenge we're looking at the moment. And as I say, this is young people who want to do this. The young people themselves are hungry for this. The barrier to them expressing and actually throwing themselves into all of this activity is the government itself. And all of the COVID recovery funding is already allocated. The decisions that are being made is how that money is being spent. They're choosing bricks. It should be people as well.
Anthony.
Well, teachers have been the unsung heroes of this pandemic, in my view, and children feel abandoned. They've lost their education. I think the figure is 110 days out of 190. They've had social isolation, mental health problems. They've lost their exams. Many people have lost their university experience and their vocational training. This is a disaster. You know, James Heckman, the American economist, won his Nobel Prize because he showed how each dollar or pound of investment gets a fantastic return the earlier you start, from pregnancy, early childhood development, primary schooling, secondary schooling. We spend most per head, interestingly, in this country on tertiary education rather than all the others and vocational. But that's a good thing as well. Look, children are our future, and we need children not just to be invested in through the education system, but actually in all policies, because they're facing not only this pandemic, which is a kind of tea party compared to the disaster of climate change that we're going to face, and they need to have investment in all kinds of things: play areas, transport, food systems, agriculture, environment, to reshape their lives for the future and give them an optimism to believe that they can really cope with what's going to be thrown at us from an unstable climate as well.
There are quite a few hands up, so let me come back to our audience. Sam, I was wondering if you'd put your hand up, because I know you're the mother of 5 children, so what's your view?
For me personally, teachers have worked so hard over the last few months, and it's so disheartening to know that funding is now going to be cut. My 2 boys now are going to be awaiting GCSE and A-levels results in August, and we just pray that they've obviously put enough work in, but the teachers have just been such a credit, and I completely agree. They've worked so hard with the kids. It's just so unfair that the funding's not going to be there.
Charlie?
Hi. Sorry, I've got 2 daughters, one age 20, one age 18, second year university doing A-levels. The one at university, her experience is, quite frankly, being shafted. The A-level one, ditto. And we've got to a stage where, okay, sometimes that happens. Please don't let it affect other year groups. Let's do something about what we can and put money into those ones that we can actually affect and change. And second, from a political Machiavellian point of view, this is an age group of about 6 years gap, and they're going to damn this government forever. And if you want people to vote for you, you've got to do something about it. Otherwise, you've lost that age group. So please sort it.
So Lucy, let me come back to you. The second half of Tim's question was, are the government waiting for Marcus Rashford to step in before they sort the rest of school funding out? The government's already suggested that more money might be coming down the line. Is this the sort of policy where we are going to see a U-turn from the government?
The government have said very clearly that they're waiting to review the evidence. And that's what they should do, because we shouldn't make policy if it's not evidence-based. So it's absolutely right that we review the evidence. We see what works.
And so when might we expect
the
that?
spending review. So it's quite unusual to announce funding outside of a spending review. And what the government has done is announced 1.4 billion outside of a spending review,
That's
which is
7
on
months'
top
time.
of 1.7
Students will be
billion,
leaving
which
school.
it's announced previously. And can I just make one other point, because it's really important? Because I, like you, think education is absolutely fundamentally important. It's one of the reasons I went into politics. And I think it is really important that we invest in young people. And one of the first announcements that Boris Johnson made when he became leader of the Conservative Party was to announce £14 billion into education for the following 3 years, to level up every single primary and secondary school pupils so that we had a good baseline. And that's a baseline from which we are working. And on top of that, we've just announced the 3 billion, and the Prime Minister has said very clearly the door is not shut, but we need to review the evidence. And the spending review will be coming up in the autumn, and we will look at it then.
OK, I can see, because there's still lots of hands up, we could talk about this for some time. We've other questions to get through, so I'm going to move on to Gary Day.
Good evening, panel. Looking forward to the 21st of June decision on COVID restrictions, and considering there were no reported deaths on Tuesday, which scientific advice should the government take?
Right, and I noticed that there were 12 deaths today reported in the latest 24-hour period. Anthony?
Well, on the face of things, things look much better. We've had this massive second surge with the Kent variant, now called the Alpha variant, which has killed 60,000+ of our fellow citizens. And, you know, cases, hospitalisations, deaths have all come down. Vaccine procurement and rollout has been very good because of the Oxford team, Kate Bingham, and, of course, most important, the NHS and primary care trusts. And we all want our lives and livelihoods back. But we're still in the middle of a raging global pandemic. We've always argued from Independent Sage for a suppression policy rather than a living with the virus herd immunity policy, which we think doesn't work.
And do you think we should lift restrictions on the 21st of June?
No, I don't, because we have a Delta variant, what was called the Indian variant, which is now thought to be 50 to 70% more transmissible. Evidence comes out today that you are 2.7 times more likely to end up in hospital with this variant compared to the Kent or Alpha variant. And it's got evidence of vaccine escape. So if you have had 1 dose of the vaccine, you are only 34% protected. If you've had 2 doses, you're only about 2/3 protected. So that means that the real figure is that only 40% of our population has had 2 doses. That means there are millions and millions of people who could be infected by this virus. Now, many of them will be younger, and death rate should be much, much lower. But many people could end up in hospital. The NHS could be thrown into another surge. We just don't know. So what do we do? I think at the moment what we have to do is to watch the data extremely carefully in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I think we must devolve power and resources to local public health teams. We just haven't given the money and the number of contact tracers that we need.
But critically, on June the 21st,
we
from where you
probably
can
need to
see at the
retain
moment,
restrictions on indoor mixing and the wearing of masks. And realistically, we've just got to wait until we can get 2 dose levels up to ideally above 80%, because the more transmissible the virus, the more coverage you need in order to achieve herd immunity.
Okay.
So I think things can very quickly get out of control. Let's remember, a year ago in March, we had 580 reported cases on March the 12th. And by the end of the month, there were 1.8 million by Imperial's estimate.
So Heather, let me come to you. I mean, if what Anthony is suggesting does come to pass, obviously that has huge implications for business.
Yes, it does. I think there's a big difference, though, between being told that we have to wear masks after June the 21st and actually stopping things from reopening.
Well, Anthony is also talking about a restriction on indoor mixing, for example.
Yes, and that there are so many industries that are still shut down. You have to remember, I mentioned earlier how many people in the air transport industry are still on furlough. Anybody who's involved in the business, for instance, at music festivals or festivals of any kind, there are still so many people who are not able to fully engage in the economy. And I don't think this virus is going away. I mean, the question was, what scientific advice do we listen to? To my mind, we have to listen to all the scientific advice, but we have to find a way to let business operate. And the sooner we can do that, the sooner the tax take will increase. And then we will have more money for things like education that I think have got much bigger long-term implications.
And
So
I appreciate, Heather, that you're not a
forgetting
scientist. Heather, I'm sorry,
No.
I appreciate you're not a scientist, but do you think restrictions should carry on after June the 21st, or do you think they should be lifted then, or even possibly sooner?
If anything, I would like to see restrictions lifted sooner, but I would like to see us work out a way to live with it on a longer term basis. I mean, we are going to be living with this virus for a very long term. Whatever going to happen on June the 21st, there'll be another date and then another date. You know, we need a permanent, long-term solution. Business cannot live with this kind of knee-jerk reaction. I mean, the reaction to me is much too immediate and not nearly long-term enough.
Okay. Sean?
Hi, I'm just thinking, you know, we are a country of around 66.5 million, you know, and I'm just, if we keep, you know, I understand, you know, the gentleman on the panel, you know, wants to do a model of suppressing the virus. To what point there is always going to be new variants? What about people with mental health? You know, you can't keep us locked up forever. We have to be released at some point.
Can I just say about lockdown? If you look at the countries that have been most successful, the Asian states, they suppress the virus by proper public health control measures. They have death rates of China 3 per million, Vietnam less than 1 per million. We're at 1,900 per million deaths, and we've had 3 lockdowns. They've had none, and their economy is thriving. If you think that you can live with a dangerous virus like this that will keep then coming back and throwing variants at us, which are more and more transmissible and potentially more virulent, we've got another thing coming. We should have invested, we should have had a test, trace and isolate program with properly supported isolation, which we still don't have in this country. We should have had that a year ago. And we're just playing the same game time and time again.
Jenny?
I think, like the entire population, well, most of the population, who are neither economists nor scientists, I am completely confused. I'm 71 years old. I would really love everything to open up again. I want to be able to go inside a restaurant. Okay, it's sunny now, but you know, when it's rainy and cold, I'd love to go inside a restaurant with my family and friends. Life to go back to normal, have a good life for as long as I may have left. But I don't know. I was watching Newsnight the other night, and they were discussing the 21st. And one scientist, just like you, said, no, we can't open up, you know, we must keep this virus down, we mustn't let it spread again. And the other one said, oh no, it'll be fine, we'll be okay, you know, we've had lots of vaccinations, I'm double vaccinated and I keep getting tested regularly, but I'm still scared. I'm scared of getting it. And my age group is kind of the most at risk one. And you just frighten me by saying how little protection I have with my double vaccination.
No, you do have protection, and
Yeah,
you are
but not
protected
enough.
against dying. You're not necessarily, we have to state the facts, and this is the government figures released today about the transmissibility and also about the virulence, the additional virulence. So we have to face reality. I'm not arguing for another national lockdown. I wish we'd not had lockdowns and have followed a much more suppressive policy. I would be going much more for a locally led process with resources going locally so hotspots can be closed down quickly.
I'm sure you're right and very well informed, but I'm in a position where, you know, we've heard of so many lies that have been told in the last, is it 18 months, 15 months, however long it's been. We don't know who to trust.
Let's see what our audience make of that. Andrea, I saw you nodding your head there.
Yeah, I'm just empathising massively with Jenny. Hi, everyone. I studied microbiology in university, but that was about 1 million years ago. My comment really on the coronavirus is Why are we not making some kind of plan to encourage people to conform to the guides, the rules, the regulations that are there? We know wearing a mask works. Let's make that mandatory. Let's make it an offence not to wear a mask. What's happening with that?
All right, let's hear from some other people too. Will?
Maybe slightly unpopular, but I think we should extend the deadline. We've got a solution, and it's the vaccine. Why should we put more people at risk, 130,000 people dead already? Why should we put more people at risk for the sake of potentially a few more weeks?
Tony?
So, good evening, Fiona. Good evening, panel. I get the impression that Anthony wants to have his cake and eat it. I mean, on the one hand, he's saying that we should maintain a lockdown. Then he says that in Vietnam, the Far East, they managed to continue to boom without a lockdown. So I'm as confused as Jenny. I mean, I thought that the vaccination program was going really, really well. I thought we were on top of this and getting better by the day. And now we're told that, well, this is going to go on forever. I mean, at some point, we've really got to regain our lives. Yes, we should have learned from what happened in Vietnam. Yes, we should have been wearing face masks much earlier. But I remember early on in the lockdowns, the scientists were poo-pooing face masks and said this disease is transmitted by touch. And so that the advice just keeps changing. I mean, I just wished all these people would sort of get together, work out, learn from what others have been doing. We haven't done well, but we haven't done as badly as some other countries. And let's move forward and get the population vaccinated. Let's get out of it, and let's move forward with sensible ideas which will allow us to regain our lives.
OK, Lucy, let me come to you. So, what scientific advice should the government follow? Obviously, we're thinking about June the 21st. You heard what Anthony said about not a proper policy on test and trace, on isolate, and we're just playing the same game time and time again.
Well, the scientific advice that we should follow is the data, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the data on how the vaccination programme is going, what new variants we have in the country, what is the hospitalisation number, and what is the death rate.
And what's it looking like for June the 21st, do you think?
So at the moment, it's looking good for June the 21st, but we're going to continue to make that assessment in the coming days and up to the 14th of June when a decision will be made.
And when it comes to Jenny's point about different scientists offering different points of view, as members of the public, what are we all supposed to make of that?
Well, I know it's not just scientists that offer different points of view. Of course, we need to listen to all the scientists, especially those on SAGE, and we also need to look at the data and take into account some of the things that your panel have been saying in relation to other matters as well, impact on mental health, impact on the economy. So politicians look at the health data, but then they have to look at everything in the round. And can I just answer one point that Anthony made, because he compared it to other countries. And I think it's also important to look at what we've done in comparison to other countries on the vaccine. So we're in a really strong position at the moment. We now know, as of today, we've vaccinated 50% of adults. And we're continuing to roll out that programme. And that is one of the reasons why, if the other data is good, one of the reasons why we might be able to open up on June the 21st.
So, Peter, from a Labour perspective, do you want June the 21st delayed, or do you want to press ahead with easing restrictions on that day?
It should be following the data and not the date. I think Anthony is completely right on that. I mean, I think Boris Johnson
would ideally like to delay for
well, he wants to follow the data, and
he
is saying what he thinks the data currently says. But we need to get closer to the point. We should never be... Boris Johnson was wrong to call it Freedom Day and to signpost it so far in advance, because we should actually have been seeing how the data and focus on getting that virus down. The Labour Party has been really constructive on this. We said months ago that everybody who comes into the country should be hotel isolated so that we could properly isolate and suppress the virus. Only 1% of them still are to this day. That's irresponsible. We've said that people who are forced to isolate should be given more support, because at the moment only 10% of people who are asked to isolate are isolating. I agree. I have real sympathy with Andrea's point. Where we get this right as a country is where the messaging is crystal clear based on scientific advice that we all understand. Where we've got it really wrong is when there's ambiguity. Remember right at the beginning when we were told that the pubs are staying open but don't go to them. Everybody was confused. We were told to take our own advice, which wasn't good enough in a public health emergency. And right now we're being told we've got amber, green and red. Make your own mind up if it's an amber. We should have green and we should have red. There shouldn't be an amber. We need absolute crystal clarity so that we can act together as a country and act together based on scientific advice we all understand. And we can move forward as a country, not always being told one thing, advised another thing, and then being made to feel personally responsible for it.
P.S., let me come to you. You've got your hand up. And also, just before we came now, you mentioned that you were originally planning to go to Portugal. Obviously, you mentioned the green list there. Peter, Portugal is now off the green list as of today.
Yeah, I actually just found out.
Or as of Tuesday, rather.
Yeah, so I didn't realise that actually until about an hour ago that Portugal was off the green list. It's very disappointing. I mean, I agree with the point that we should follow the data rather than the dates, but it's impossible for businesses and for people to figure out then when we are going to be able to open up. So you can't not have a date to work towards. I also think that with the amount of people that have been vaccinated, with how long this has been going on, with the impact on children's mental health and on the economy in general, that at some point we do need to, draw some kind of line under this and just say that we have to accept this as another disease among all of the other diseases that we have to deal with. So I am sympathetic to the view that we need to just, unlock. We need to have our people vaccinated, which they are. We need to be clear. I do agree with the Labour person that we need to be clear as to what's red and what's green. I found out now that Portugal is on the amber list. I have no idea what that means for me personally. I assume it means as an NHS employee I can't travel because I can't come back and go to work. But it would be easier, I think, if people understood what they can and can't do rather than what they may be able to do. So to me, I think, we need a date. I think we need to have a balance between the economy and trying to save every single person going into hospital. We have to accept that, just like people, a man dies of prostate cancer every 45 minutes in the UK. We're not up in arms about that every second of the day. We need to accept that, this is going to be with us. We need to have a balance, I think, between the economy and people's lives and what we can do with our freedoms.
OK, well, P.S., you mentioned mental health, and actually we have a question on that, so let's take that now from Ryan Harding.
Thank you, Fiona. So my question is, as we see Naomi Osaka withdraw from the French Open as a result of the impact the press has had on her mental health, when will issues of mental health ever be seriously considered?
So for those of you who are not completely across this story, the world number 2, Naomi Osaka, she's pulled out of the French Open after deciding she'd no longer take part in post-match press conferences, and she said they were badly affecting her mental health. And actually she's been fined for that and been threatened with various sanctions as well. Jenni?
I had an awful lot of sympathy for her, as I often have for, I don't watch a lot of sport, but I do watch athletics quite a lot. And they come running off the track and they're rushing up to try to get to their parents to be congratulated, and somebody's there with a microphone stuck under their noses. They can barely breathe. And you just think, no, leave them alone. What they're good at is what they do on the track. What she is good at is what she does on the tennis court. And sometimes you watch these interviews. I do occasionally watch Wimbledon, and they're still puffed when they're being interviewed. They might not have played quite as well as they hoped they had, and they're desperately embarrassed, and I'm desperately bored. And I think, no,
but what do you think? So when you've got someone like Billie Jean King, for example, saying, I've always believed that as professional athletes we have a responsibility to make ourselves available to the media.
Martina Navratilova, who I adore and have adored for many, many years, because she's the best tennis player ever. She said the same thing. But that means it's just business. It's the sport that I want to watch. I want to watch her whack her ball with her racket and then go home and maybe at the end of the tournament, when she's won, give a nice little speech in the middle of the court saying how grateful she is. But don't pester them. It's horrible.
Anthony.
Well, anxiety depression is the commonest illness in the world. And it's largely untreated and largely undiagnosed, actually. And sports people, you see, Naomi Osaka has said that she's a shy and reserved person. She's interesting because her mother's Japanese and her father is Haitian. And she identifies with the black community, and she's done a lot for the Black Lives Matter movement and come in for a lot of flack from that. And she's always hated public speaking. She's 23 years old. And, you know, lots and lots of people, everyone watching and on the panel, will either have had mental health problems or will know people that have had that. We should respect that sports people, elite sports people, actually probably are higher at risk of this because they're in the public eye, and I think we should treat it sensitively. What you don't do is when she says, I really can't do the press conferences because of my mental health, you don't say we're going to fine you and throw you out the tournament. No, it makes no sense at all. And, you know, a lot of people, I think we
but
have...
others have to, but you could argue that other players might not want to do that, particularly if they've you know, bombed a game, for example, or they felt they played really badly. They may not want to do press conferences either, but nonetheless they do.
Well,
and
get the coaches on. You know, in soccer, you don't get every football player interviewed after the match. OK, it's a team game. But, you know, we've heard so much about... I think we are more open about it. You know, when you think Serena Williams, Johnny Wilkinson, Alistair Campbell, Lady Gaga, Prince Harry, they all talk about mental health problems now. But we have to have systems that respect the fact that if she said she'd injured her knee, you know, people would have thought nothing of it. But when she says, I've got a mental health problem, which is quite courageous, she should have been looked after by the sports authorities.
Hannah.
Hi. I think the press only really have themselves to blame for the fact that sports people don't want to talk to them. They've become more and more combative, looking for that angle, the scoop, the story, the headline that's going to shift their article over the others. And as a result, they've isolated the people that they're writing about. They no longer work with the sports people. They don't kind of consider their mental health at all. They're solely focused on what they can get out of that interview. And I think it should be, it should reflect back on them, and they should be limited in their access.
Steve?
Yeah, hi everyone. She's a world number 2. This can't be new to her. So suddenly it's a problem being accosted by the press. What happened when she was world number 3 or world number 8? It's part of the job, as has been said earlier. That's what goes with the territory. Okay, if she suddenly got a problem, mental health problem, yeah, I would have every sympathy with her.
I mean, I'll just point out that Naomi has said that she has suffered long bouts of depression since the US Open in 2018. She's had a really hard time coping with that, and she's 23 years old. Ryan, you asked the question. What's your view?
Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, Naomi Osaka, I think, has been incredibly brave. As you said, she's only 23. She's a very young lady, and she's been forced to take a lot of responsibility at a very early age. But I think it extends to a wider point with mental health, but also with other issues like sexism and racism, that people say that if you're going through something, to share that experience and to tell people your issues and your problems. Naomi Osaka has been very brave and done that. But when she has done that, she's been lambasted and vilified by very many people. For instance, an unnamed popular journalist in the UK has been very forthright in his views about Naomi Osaka. So I think we should all have a bit more sympathy and patience and realise that she's a human being like we're all human beings, and she goes through things like we all go through.
And Heather, I just wanted to come to you. I mean, there's where does one find the balance between protecting someone's mental health, which Naomi Osaka clearly feels has not been supported in that way, and then the spectators, either at home or actually turning up to the games, who want to hear from their heroes, and they want to hear how the game went and what they felt of their play, and you know, whether they, you know, what we can learn from that.
I think what the spectators want to hear want to do more than anything else, though, is watch Naomi Osaka play tennis, and that to me is what most spectators want. And given the choice between Naomi Osaka playing tennis, being able to watch her, or her not being there at all. I personally would prefer being able to watch her play tennis. And as it's mentioned here, she is 23. And, the mental health problems that have arisen, I think, in this pandemic, that all the work from the Resolution Foundation shows that it is that group, is that age group, the sort of the under 25 age group that have suffered more than anybody else in this pandemic. So I'm very, very pleased that Naomi Osaka has stood up like this, because I think it's called out the whole issue of the under 25 age group. And I'll make two other points about that. First of all, I was really pleased that MasterCard, who are her big sponsor, went straight out behind her and said, we back you 100%, because if anything was going to make that whole thing fall apart, it was if her sponsors all sort of turned their backs on her. And the second thing I would say is that, I see young people all the time in my job at that age. And I think as universities, we have a responsibility to people between the ages of 17 and 24 or whatever, to equip them to go out into the world. It's a tough and difficult place to be. And as has already been mentioned, this is something, that happens to lots of people. This is one of the most common things, anxiety, depression. And I think it's important that we equip our young people, and that's what I set out to do all the time, equip our young people with the skills and capabilities, not just exam passes, but to be able to deal with things. And so I just like to see her play tennis, actually. That's what I feel as a fan.
And Lucy, as I say, it's such a difficult issue because it's impossible not to have sympathy for Naomi Osaka, of course. But I can't imagine there's any player who really looks forward to that post-match interview. And I guess you could get to a situation where people say, well, I don't want to do it either.
John McEnroe did.
What do you mean?
Well, he loved it.
Oh, he loved it.
You get some extrovert.
Well, if you've won, perhaps, but if you've lost, I can't imagine there's many who do that.
He'd still come on and swear.
I think there might be a difference between people who just don't, it's not what they really want to do, and people who are having mental health issues and doing it. And I think, like others have said, it was really courageous of her to do it. It was really important for her to do it. I think when people struggle with mental health, it's really important to mention that, because there shouldn't be any stigma attached.
Well, what do you think of the response from the Grand Slam tournaments? I mean, they've slightly climbed down from that, but to begin with, they basically threatened her with sanctions, issued a fine, said that she may not be able to play at Wimbledon and other tournaments. Do you think that was the right approach?
Well, obviously, I'm sure they'll be thinking about their reactions to that, but I do think that mental health is a big problem that we need to address, and I think Heather was right to say we need to support young people in this. When I was on the Education Select Committee a number of years ago, we did a report on mental health and how students were coping with it, and I went to one of the schools in my constituency and I said, I want you to ask me loads of questions about being an MP, but do you mind if we just spend the first 10 minutes talking about mental health, because I want to ask you the questions we're studying. And in fact, we spent the whole session on mental health because everybody wanted to talk about it. So we do need to invest in schools, we need to support people in mental health, and that is really, really important.
Peter?
I think it's quite a sad conversation that we're having here. I think every profession needs to have people from different backgrounds and different personality types involved in it. So the thing that is driving creativity, whether it's sporting creativity, whether it's artistic creativity, whether it's in politics, public life, or any other walk of life, is informed by people's backgrounds. Some people have hidden challenges, other people have seen challenges. But Naomi has a challenge which is unseen, and yet everybody is expecting her in her personality to conform to everything else. Her personality type clearly is helping her creativity and sporting performance. I do not see why it's not possible for her sport and the people running her sport to make an individual decision about whether individual players can cope with being in the public eye or not. Why would we drive people out of a sporting profession because they don't have the personality type, which is an alpha personality type? In politics, I think it is a huge shame that introverts and extreme introverts find politics and public life impossible for them. We miss out on people who think differently, act differently, and bring a different set of, a different power to the way that they think and the discussions that they have, because they're too scared to get involved in the real to and fro. So I just ask people to be kind when we have situations like this. It's a genuine human thing to do. I'm sure the sport, like every other profession, can identify individual people based on individual discussions and informative exchanges to people who just need to quietly be let off the hook on one or two things. Why can't we do that in a sport with the resources that tennis has?
Let's just hear one more contribution from our audience. Tony.
Yes, thank you, Fiona. I'm sure that when we make these life choices, and sport is one of them, surely publicity and featuring on with the press, it comes with the territory, and I feel very sorry for Naomi. But, you know, she should have anticipated that people would be interested in her story, she would be interviewed, and I'll bet Jenni, if she'd been given the opportunity in the day, she'd have had her on Woman's Hour straight away to interview her.
And I would have interviewed her absolutely beautifully and gently. And taken great care of her mental health, you know, when you do those kind of things day after day. But when you're in a sporting environment, I won't mention any names of people who I've...
No, sorry, Jenni.
We don't know, Tony, until you get into these positions. These people who go onto Love Island, they don't know what it's like to be under the media spotlight. You think you know what it looks like as a viewer, but when you get to the top of any profession, whether it's in business, whether it's in politics, whether it's in sport, or whether it's in the arts, there are lots of artists out there, performers, who can't perform live. They do it in the studio because they don't like it. They can't cope with it emotionally. So please, let's just be a bit kind about some of these people.
She's a black woman, and she gets tremendous abuse, no doubt, on social media. Women get far more abuse than men in social media, and black people, look at Diane Abbott, who breaks all records for being abused on social media. How much has that contributed to her mental health state? And that's why she doesn't want to do it. She's a tennis player. Let's enjoy her tennis. Talk to the coach afterwards. What's the problem?
OK. Let's take another question now from Phil Bond.
Why has the eviction ban on tenants with rent arrears finished when the full restrictions have not been lifted and people have been unable to return to work?
So in England, the coronavirus evictions ban came to an end on Monday. And of course, we've been talking about June the 21st. We don't quite know whether restrictions are going to be fully lifted then or not. So why has this eviction ban finished then, Lucy?
Well, we've protected tenants for a long period of time, and it's really important that we did that because we didn't want anyone to be thrown out of their houses during this period.
So why have you lifted it now?
But it is also important that landlords can take control where it is necessary to do so, and there will be a period of time, of course, where tenants will be able to settle themselves in. But, you know, we are coming out of a lockdown. There's been a large number of measures put in place. But, you know, hopefully we are at the end of that period, and we've talked about it before. And we hopefully will be moving back on to normal life.
Peter?
I think that response just illustrates the entire lack of empathy this government has with people who don't share the circumstances of most of the people who are in government at the moment. For people who aren't homeowners and who are renting and struggling to get by, the sheer insecurity that people are being plunged into, and the only reason there's a slight transition period is because people are going to be stuck in court for the next 6 months finding out whether they are going to be evicted or not. There should be a longer period of time, there should be before this kicks in. I understand and I have huge sympathy for landlords who are overwhelmingly decent people who are trying to support the people who are tenants to them, but there should be some form of compensation that can ease the transition in, and people who have lost their jobs need to have time so they can readjust to the new economy that's coming out of COVID, rather than plunging them into this insecurity. It is going to mean rough sleeping is going to go through the roof. It means that there's going to be a huge churn in communities as people are kicked out of their homes and other people are going to be flooding in. It is going to be real instability. And do you agree
with the housing charity Shelter that no-fault evictions should be banned?
Oh, yes, I do.
OK. Dana?
Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, I think tenants need a lot of support. But I do believe that landlords, if you had your own house and you're supplying a tenant with a rental, a lot of landlords have problems sometimes just trying to get their property, and do what they want with it. So I think a landlord should have the right to use his property and let whoever he wants in there to rent. However, I do think the government should come up with an incentive scheme to pay landlords who support poor tenants or people who struggle with their rent, that the government steps in and actually helps the landlord and encourages them to try and keep the tenant going. And then also, I do think the tenants should have that wee bit more support as well until we get well and truly out of this COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Fatima?
Whilst I have every sympathy with landlords, I think the ending of the eviction ban is premature just at the moment. Just earlier today, Michael Gove was saying that he doesn't rule out an extension to furlough. So that's going to mean more people losing their jobs or not earning as much and not able to pay their rent. So now is not the time.
Is now the time, Heather?
Well, first of all, can I just a point of clarification? There hasn't been a ban on evictions limited. Evictions have been possible throughout the pandemic. It's just been the length of notice period that's been given. And what actually has changed this week in England only.
No, but hang on, Heather. Evictions were not being, Heather, I'm sorry, but evictions were not being enforced unless in very particular circumstances, which effectively was a ban. Yeah. But so do you think the time has come to lift that ban now?
Yes, I do. I think in order to have a properly functioning rental sector, and can I just say why we need a properly functioning rental sector? It's because house prices have gone up so much now that it is almost impossible for anybody to get on the housing ladder in an early stage. You know, most people are going to be living in rental accommodation. There's twice as many people living in rental accommodation now as there were 10 years ago, and 4 times as many as 20 years ago. You know, we need a functioning rental sector. And just like one of our commentators in the audience mentioned, if we do not get the ability to evict tenants, then people won't put their houses up for rent. That's what will happen. And then we'll have loads and loads of empty housing stock. And that, to me, is a much bigger problem. And in the meantime, what the government has done, all the governments, because this is a devolved matter, is put measures in place. So even now, even from the 1st of June in England, you have to give 4 months' notice. So there are measures in place that take the pandemic into account, but we must have normality because we must have a flourishing rental sector.
Phil, you asked a question. I could see you shaking your head throughout that.
Yeah, I mean, it came back earlier was the Conservative member there just mentioned, oh, well, you know, things will get back to normal. Well, people are still on furlough. People still aren't back in work. So when they're back to normal, fine, then look at this, the way the rent is paid and whatever. But don't turn on and say, well, we're doing it now because things eventually will get back to normal. It's been done too early. And people are worried now of being evicted. They're worried about losing their own job. And the next thing they're going to be worried about is whether they're going to lose their house as well.
Anthony.
Well, eviction is a disaster for families and for children. I was astonished to find that 90,000 children in London live in temporary accommodation, and the effects that that will have on their families, on their education, and the rest. So in the short term, we need long notice periods, debt renegotiation, and interest-free loans. I agree, you know, with Heather about the keeping a rental sector going. But I think in the medium term, we need architects and builders to be coming up with much more low-cost, affordable housing, maybe using, you know, newer prefabricated techniques which build quickly, which are low carbon, which are environmentally friendly. And I think we can solve this problem alongside progressive policies to ensure that people don't lose their homes.
Jenny?
I think people underestimate the amount of poverty this pandemic has caused. I live in a quite well-off part of London, and I'm okay, you know, I own my own house. We have a food bank that is absolutely flooded out with people who simply cannot afford to buy food for their children. I cannot think of anything more damaging to one's mental health to be a woman renting a house or a flat with 2 children and terrified because she can't pay her rent that at any minute she is going to be evicted. That is criminal, absolutely criminal.
And Jenny, what would you say to someone who, for example, a landlord who was renting out one property and that rent was enabling them to stay in their own property? What would you say to them?
They chose to be a landlord. They could have some sort of empathy in the current economic climate. They can probably get their mortgage redone, talk to the Building Society about it. There are always ways of getting around that kind of thing. But if you're a very poor woman with children, living alone, with no resources, and no knowledge of how to argue these things and where to find help, it's just criminal. It really is.
Andrea.
Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, again, I'm really empathising with what Jenny's saying. I've been in that position. I've been in a position where myself and my daughter were effectively homeless, and it's a really horrible place to be. I was fortunate enough that I could get in a car and go and live with my parents for a year or two, but being in that situation is like nothing that I would wish on my worst enemy.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know how many people on the panel and how many people on the various advisory boards that made the decision about stopping the eviction have actually been in danger of losing the roof over their head.
Well, how many of us have been in danger of losing the roof overhead? Not me.
No.
Not me.
So, Lucy, what do you say to someone like Andrea?
Well, obviously, Andrea, it must have been very, very, very difficult for you and must have had an impact on your life. I feel for you in that situation. But the audience have highlighted a number of issues which the government are addressing. So it's not just about the rental properties and the position in relation to that. It's also, as I think Peter brought up, about rough sleeping, and the government have done a significant job of getting rough sleepers off the streets during the pandemic, and got all rough sleepers off the streets during the pandemic. In addition to that, it's about building a sustainable housing market, as Heather talked about. That's absolutely fundamental, and we've got a planning bill that is going to be coming to the House, which will encourage and ensure that we have sufficient housing stock so that people can buy affordable homes. Because yes, it is important that people can rent, but it's also important that people want to buy. There are houses available to them to buy. In my own constituency, I went to visit last week a community land trust, which is a fantastic idea, where the community has a proportion of land in a development which the community owns and is affordable housing for people who live and work locally. So the government has a variety of measures to tackle what is a very, very difficult problem.
Our hour is up, I'm afraid. There's lots of you with your hands up. I know we could keep on talking. Apologies that we can't. Thank you very much to the panel for coming along this evening. Thank you, Heather, for joining us down the line. Thank you to our QT50, the 20 of you that we have here this evening. We'll see more of your faces, I know, as the weeks go on. And thank you to you at home for watching. From Question Time. Bye-bye.